Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 16 of me speaking about what's on my mind or trying to be more of my authentic self. Today, I wanted to cover a skill that I worked very hard on, and that's communication. Now, this is something you can use between you and your spouse, uh, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever you guys are calling your situations now, between friends, between uh, athlete and coach, and even something I'm learning now is also between parent and child, right? So this skill is something I had to develop essentially from the ground up. And that may seem weird, but I just remember having a conversation with my coach when I was about 15. And I was really gung ho about making the Olympics. And frankly, if I was talking to someone and the conversation did not help me win, or is not something that I thought would help me win more matches or help me win the Olympics, I didn't care to talk about it. I really didn't. And he actually had he pulled me to the side. He's like, "Hey, like, do you like hang out with friends?" I was like, "No, not really." And he was like, "Why not?" And I was like, "Well, if it doesn't help me win fights, I don't really see the point of it." And he's like, "What about like just catching up for conversation?" I was like, "If it doesn't help me win fights, I don't really see the point of it." He's like, "What about this conversation?" And I was like, so he's like, "This conversation seems pointless." And I was like, a little bit. He kind of laughed it off. And since then, I've matured, thankfully. It was just kind of shocking to me that and it was brought to my attention when I was 18. I took a sales job because it's hard to get employed when you're working out 3 times a day and you have like 2 hour availability between that and school. So I took a sales job because a sales job you can work essentially whenever and it fit with my schedule. So one of the managers pulled me inside and she went, "Chris, like, so what do you do to build rapport?" And I was like, what does that word mean?" And she's like, "Rapport is like, like small talk. People say like how are you? Like, how do you answer?" And I was like, people actually care what you say after that? And she was like, her mind was blown. She's like, "Yes, Chris, of course. That's why people ask the question." So anyway, that's where I started. Was really I had zero conversation skills. I had zero care in the world about it. Besides, talking to my friends here and there at school, or realistically when it was if they're in the vicinity. But I didn't go out of my way to make conversation. I didn't go out of my way to make conversation, especially if it was during season. Like, I did not care. I was really tired a lot of the time around school friends, etc. So a lot of this I had to learn from the ground up. Um, the biggest things there's a whole range of things I can cover, but the biggest things I wanted to talk about today are the ones that have made the most impression on me and the ones I use the most. And that is essentially the two techniques of mirroring and labeling. Now, mirroring, you've probably heard this term before, or some of you may not, is helping the other person feel comfortable by copying their body language. Now, it's not something you do strictly. So if I'm sitting like this, I don't immediately go into this. But at some point, I'll make it a point to try and match the body language, because physically, if the person sees the same kind of body language, they're going to feel more at ease. It's going to help them feel more at ease to speak to them or speak about themselves, et cetera, et cetera. If they're leaning back, eventually I'm going to lean back. If they have one arm up, I might mirror them, put my arm up somewhere. You don't have to do it automatically, but eventually you want to do that, right? And so that's the first step. The second thing I do a lot now is I do labeling, or I guess this is a term from, I forgot the exact term. There's a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. I would highly recommend it. It's a free PDF. He's the FBI's top negotiator, and he goes into the things he uses to try and influence terrorists to give up hostages without giving up any money, right? That's a pretty hard job. And one of the main tools he uses is called labeling. And so what you're doing is you're essentially trying to assume the other person's emotion. So if someone's explaining a story to me and I want them to keep talking, I would say, "Wow, it seems like that was really," or let's say it's they're pretty upset. You'd say something like, "Oh, it seems like that really upset you," or "It seems like that's really upsetting," or "It looks like that's really upsetting," or "It feels like that's really upsetting." And generally, when people have their emotion labeled properly, they'll respond favorably to you, and they'll keep talking. Now, the point of this is because if you want to help someone, or you want to make someone feel heard, right? That's a big thing in a lot of relationships. Like, "I don't feel heard." A lot of it is they feel like you don't don't have a grasp of the emotion they're feeling, right? If I'm talking to someone and he just monotone gives me advice, right, without addressing the emotion behind the words, a lot of times, even though it's good advice, they may not feel heard. So I would suggest trying that in your own time. You can say, like, when someone's explaining something to you, oh, that seems really upsetting, or oh, it seems like that's really overwhelming. And if you're wrong, like the worst case scenario, you're wrong. Instead of feeling upsetting, I felt really angry. I'd say, actually, it made me feel a little bit angry. And so that would be that's one of the big ones to help people feel heard, right? Because that's the big thing in communication is it's not necessarily you being able to talk, right? It's how do they receive the message. And if there's still a lot of emotion behind what they are saying, there's a barrier between what you're saying and what they're hearing. And you need to get that through that emotional barrier by labeling and addressing the emotion first. And then the information has an easier time getting through. Now I'm listening to this other podcast called The Dad's Edge, and they gave kind of a spin-off of this technique where you want to generalize, then normalize, and then invite. So in their way of doing this, instead of saying, oh, that looks upsetting to you, I think he said something like, they say, I can see why that's upsetting. Who wouldn't be upset by that? Please, like, tell me more. And a lot of people feel that, and they go, oh, well, I feel very heard, and it's normal to feel that way. Of course, I'm going to tell you more stuff. And I'm not saying this and telling you guys this as a way to manipulate people. This is just techniques I had to like really manually learn, right? And so I had to learn so that way I could communicate well, so my wife feels heard, so my kid feels heard, because this kind of labeling and stuff is stuff you can do with your child if you guys have a kid. Or this is something you can do with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or this is something you can do with parents, right? Essentially, every person on the planet just wants to feel heard and feel understood. And that's kind of the baseline. And these are tools that I have learned and I'm using to help the people around me and my spouse and my child feel heard and understood, because at the end of the day, that's what I want for them. I want them to be happy. I want them to feel like they're loved and cared for and listened to. And yeah, I want to speak about that today because this is something that came up in the podcast I was listening to, and it's something I struggled with for a long time. And a lot of people, part of this podcast was they're going over to different dads and talking about why the marriage is good or not good. And a lot of these dads don't know that these skills are out there to be learned, or that these skills exist. And this is, it didn't dawn on me that it's something you had to that you didn't not have to study, or you didn't have to study. I just assumed that you had to learn these skills at some point because that's the path I went on. And sometimes I have the mistake of saying, well, that's the path I went on, then I guess everyone else went on that same path. So this is all stock knowledge for everybody. But that's not the case, obviously. So I hope these couple of tools and tips help you guys. I hope if you guys implement them, they'll have positive benefit on your relationships. And I wish you guys the best. See you guys tomorrow.